Good evening, internets. Wanted to make a quick little video post of something really groovy before I went to bed. I've always really been enamored with analog synthesis. One of my favorites, one that I've always been just absolutely crazy about, is a synthesizer called a SID. A SID is a synthesizer chipset that was included and shipped with this beautiful little bread box right here, which, if you're awesome, you recognize as a Commodore 64 home computer. These things were utterly ubiquitous throughout the 80s. I used them in school. I grew up with them. I fell in love with the machine and with the sounds that it could generate. It's gritty and imperfect and rough, and the filters sound weird, and the harmonics sound weird, and the bass is absolutely crushing, and it's just so utterly different from anything else in the world. It's utterly unique. And up till recently, there hasn't really been a good way to harness that SID sound. You could either buy a dedicated synthesizer where people would actually tear the audio chipsets out of abandoned C64s and then put them into a dedicated device that you could play as an instrument, except these were fairly rare, mostly built in extremely short runs, and they now go for thousands of dollars on eBay, so that's not really an option. People have also done software synthesis emulations, if you will, of the chipset that comes in here, but it's never quite the same. There's no way to really capture exactly what that chip is doing really well. So you could either have something incredibly expensive or something that didn't quite sound right. But what I recently got and have just gotten hooked up and fully working tonight is a really ingenious solution called a mssiah. It's from a group called 8-Bit Ventures, which is you can view their website at 8bitventures.com. What the 8-Bit Ventures guys have come up with is a cartridge that plugs in, this mssiah cartridge, that plugs into the cartridge port and gives the C64 a MIDI interface, so that you can now drive the SID chipset that is inside this machine externally over MIDI. It's really brilliant, and I've gotten it all hooked up this evening. Basically what the setup is here, you've got the C64, the mssiah cartridge is in the cartridge port. It gives you, which there's currently a cable plugged into it, but it gives you a standard DIN MIDI jack, MIDI in. I've got that wired up to my Ion synth, currently just using the Ion as a controller. Coming out of the 64 is a custom breakout box that I built. This breakout box gives you composite video and then comes out into two regular old-fashioned 1/4 inch jacks, all right? One of these is an out, one of these is an in. You can actually input audio into the SID, which I haven't experimented with, but that might be interesting. But the out, got coming out to just a regular old 1/4 jack, and that's going through a chain of guitar effect pedals. This is a Roland RE20 Space Echo, which is the digital emulation of a analog tape delay, a Electro Harmonix Big Muff Pi distortion pedal, and all that loops through and goes into my guitar amp. So I've hooked my C64 into my guitar amp. That's pretty freaking awesome. What this is kind of styled after, if I move around here, is sort of the layout of any other analog synthesizer in the world you have. And it's kind of hard to read. Obviously there's graphical limitations that the 64 has to deal with, but this is pretty freaking awesome for a 64 app, to be honest. So what you have here are the sort of things that you would expect in most analog synthesizers. You have oscillator 1, oscillator 2, you have waveform selects for each oscillator, frequency fine tunes, all that sort of stuff. A filter bank section over here, mixers between the two oscillators. So it's sort of the traditional analog synthesizer signal path where stuff comes in from the two oscillators, mixes together, goes through the filter section. There's a amplifier section through here, although it seems to be more of a sort of an envelope kind of select, I think is what they're getting at here. There's an LFO, or a low frequency oscillator. You actually need Commodore 64 paddles to tweak any of these virtual knobs here, and I don't actually have any paddles, so I'm kind of screwed Also, alternately, instead of using paddles, you can also send MIDI CC or control change messages, but the keyboard that I'm using, my Ion, doesn't really have the ability to send programmable control changes. So right now I'm kind of just having to operate based on the presets that are coming with it, but some of those are quite fun. So what I'm going to do here is open up the menu, and I'm still kind of learning this UI. So I'm going to open up one of the demonstration patch banks here, and that's there's a lot of demo stuff actually stored on the cartridge for you to use, and that's going to preset some stuff. And then I'm going to go and select one of the patches. I think I was playing with patch 1 before, or patch 2 actually, so let's set that over to patch 2. And you see as you change the preset patches, the different knobs and settings change, which is pretty cool. I think it's patch 3 actually, I'm going to use that one. And now I'm going to go ahead and enable MIDI. While it's actually working with MIDI, it can't drive the screen, it can't do both at once. So when I switch it over to MIDI here, you'll see MIDI versus SEQ for, I guess, sequencer. When I switch it into MIDI, you'll notice the screen blanks out because it doesn't have enough brains to be able to do both at the same time. I'm going to fire up, or at least turn up, my amp. You gotta notice a little noise here, a little bit of a squeal. Part of that is just the nature of the 64, part of that is the breakout box. It probably still has some work and some shielding that could be done to quiet this up a little bit. So the space echo's off, Big Mouse off, everything is just straight what's coming out of the 64, and I've got the Ion here rigged up, so when you play notes through this, it's pretty dramatic. So that's pretty beefy. It's playing pretty low. I've actually got the keyboard set up to send pretty low octave notes. I can pop it up an octave. And it's got a pretty wide range, so down from the pretty thick stuff all the way. The pitch bend works, of course, which is very cool. And it keeps going on up to fairly ear-piercing octaves. So that's no mod, and then as I tweak the mod setting, you can hear it resonating very differently as I go through the range of the mod wheel. Up to very piercing kind of things, and then back down. It's capable of some very menacing sort of sounds here. It gets really additionally interesting with a little bit of effect. So going through the tape delay to give it sort of an echoing sort of noise, now you get a completely different quality. So it's kind of a fast, kind of a slappy echo kind of a thing. So just a few quick little samples here. Obviously I'm just using canned patches. Additional hardware will let me take better control of it, but that's really incredibly cool, so I just wanted to show that off. So anyway, don't throw away your old computers. They're awesome. Later.